Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Faith, and I'm with Med School Tutors. And tonight I am here with PrepMatch. We're here to talk to you about CASPer. So while everybody's filing in, I figure we'll just take a second and introduce ourselves and introduce who we are. Again, my name is Faith. I'm with Med School Tutors. We've been around since 2006, and I've been with the company since 2010. And we just really love what we do. Sebastian, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Of course, thank you, Faith, for the introduction. My name's Sebastian David. I'm one of the PrepMatch interns, and I've been a part of the team since it all started last year. I've taken a CASPer a couple of times, and I'm very well informed on how to prepare for CASPer, and that's why I really was happy to join PrepMatch and be a part of that community. And I'm so thankful that we're here hosted by Med School Tutors.
Thanks, that's awesome. While looks like most of you are here, which is great. So Sebastian, if you want to go ahead to the next slide. If you've never heard about Med School Tutors before, Sebastian's going to do the bulk of the talking tonight because he is the resident CASPer expert. But at Med School Tutors, we basically have you covered from everything you need from pre-med all the way through residency. And we do one-on-one tutoring online. It's all personalized, it's all highly, highly customized, and we're all super passionate about teaching and just helping people succeed and paying forward our own successes. So yeah, we love what we do, and we live and breathe everything pre-med and med school and residency and beyond. So if you need anything from us, you can see our contact information here on this slide. But otherwise, Sebastian, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you do at PrepMatch? And I'm going to let you take it away on the CASPer front. I'm going to
Oh,
turn off my camera while you do this.
yeah, well, thank you, Faith, so much for that. So, a little bit about PrepMatch. We are founded in Toronto, Ontario, here in Canada, in October 2020, so very recently. And we started PrepMatch as a way to kind of provide some sort of accessible CASPer preparation for this new and upcoming test called CASPer that seems to be taking the pre-med world by storm. So PrepMatch is a peer-to-peer CASPer preparation platform that allows students to work with one another to review each other's CASPer answers, take custom CASPer practice tests completely free of charge. We noticed that as we were trying to gather some more information about CASPer and trying to prepare for CASPer, I noticed it myself. A lot of CASPer preparation is behind large paywalls, and it's often associated with large companies who have these CASPer experts who have these section banks that are not actually sanctioned, and it really adds to the payload that already is a huge thing, as I'm sure you know, in applying and getting ready for school. So what we really wanted to do with PrepMatch is find a way to make CASPer prep a little bit more accessible to everyone, and to have people understand that they can prepare for the CASPer test, um, and and to keep a level playing field. So I'm going to jump into what CASPer kind of is and what it's about if you've never heard of it. I'm going to go over everything about it, and then I'll introduce what PrepMatch is and why it's such a useful tool. But as some background, for those of you who don't know what CASPer is, what I've been rambling on about, CASPer stands for Computer-Based Assessment for Sampling Personal Characteristics. And it's an admissions test developed by the researchers here in Canada at McMaster University. And it aims to measure traits like professionalism, ethics, communication, and empathy. This image here is actually straight from the CASPer website. And these are the traits that they say that they are looking for in their test, what they're trying to assess for. In a way, it mirrors kind of the very popular multiple mini interview style, also created by McMaster, otherwise known as MMI, which is also kind of taking the lead in the interview styles for most pre-medical programs. But what stays constant in all of these CASPer tests is their structure. So the CASPer scenario, or the CASPer structure rather, is a compiled test of 12 different scenarios for which you're given 5 minutes to answer 3 questions about that scenario. So these scenarios range from any sort of interpersonal conflict to kind of macro ideas, and we'll go over a couple of those when we review PrepMatch and some of the questions there. But they, at the end of the day, try to test these core competencies and try to understand what you would do in different situations. Now, the biggest mystery about the CASPer is how it is rated. And unlike the MCAT or the DAT um, or any other big admissions test, we don't actually get any information about your score or how CASPer is rated exactly. Well, I'll tell you what we do know, what we've gathered about it. So what we do know is that each CASPer scenario of the 12 is rated by a different rater. So this means you'll have 12 different people looking at your answers. Each reviewer or rater gives your scenario a score from 1 to 9. And at the end of your test, you have 12 different scores from 1 to 9, and that score is averaged and is put on a percentile graph. These percentiles, or quartiles as they're being called, are sent to schools, and schools make the informed decision on how they use that CASPer test. So you don't actually get a score back, and only until recently have they started to kind of change this idea. I highly advise you to look at the CASPer website for official details because this is a relatively new thing. But what they've started to do for the 2021-2022 cycle here is they're starting to give people quartile scores. So for instead of giving people an exact score, say like you got an average of 7 out of 9 or a 6 out of 9, what they're doing is giving people a breakdown of where they fall within 4 quartile ranges. So that's from 0 to 24%, 25 to 49%, 50 to 74%, and 75 to 99 or 100%. And they say that the applicants who placed in the higher quartiles may have done so for a couple of reasons, which I'll go over. But they boil down to a couple different things. Some of them include maybe effort. They tried a little bit harder to respond, i.e. they explained their position a little bit more fully or used the full amount of time better than another applicant. They demonstrated a little bit more empathy and that they considered all perspectives in a meaningful way. In the same way, they could have shown a little bit more equity, so a high degree of respect for others and the experiences and the needs of others in those relationships. They demonstrated a different way to communicate with an above average ability to kind of articulate their ideas in a succinct manner. And they really got used to the medium and practice and were really comfortable with taking the test. And that's one thing that I can't stress enough is that you can practice for this test even though you don't get any scored feedback like you do for the other big tests. But um, really don't listen to what anyone else says about that. Really try to familiarize yourself and get used to the timing. Now, I alluded to this earlier, but the programs that use the CASPer really stretch far and wide. Med schools, dental schools, optometry schools, nursing schools, vet schools, PA schools, and many more use the CASPer test. You'll see how many schools use that test. I'll show you kind of what the process looks like to kind of sign up for CASPer and how you can know kind of what dates you're looking at to take the CASPer. And yeah, so I'll take you straight forward to that. Just a second. So here we are at takealtus.com. This is the official CASPer website. And what you're going to want to do is just go straight to dates and fees. And this information is up to date for the 2021-2022 cycle, as I mentioned. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to browse test dates and times. These are the various countries that the CASPer test is being used in and administrated in. So for demonstration purposes, we're going to go to the United States of America, and here are the different programs that use it. In our case, we're going to look at the medical programs, so that is allopathic and osteopathic. And we have a certain kind of CASPer test code. Think of this as your barcode of sorts for the CASPer test that you're going to take. It still follows the same structure that I outlined earlier. So that's 12 scenarios, 5 minutes to answer 3 questions about those scenarios. But the types of scenarios that you be presented might be a little bit different and a little bit more fine-tuned. But in general, the CASPer test is relatively similar for all the applicants. After we've selected the type of CASPer test that we want to take, we can look at all the different schools that actually use it and that we want to deliver our CASPer score to. So I'm just going to take this line of schools at random here, and we'll move forward. And what this website does and why it's useful is to tell us kind of what time frame we can schedule our CASPer test. So much like the MCAT, there are scheduled dates when you can take the CASPer test. You don't have to go to a testing center. You just have to have a reliable computer, reliable internet connection, a webcam, and a microphone. And when you sign up for the CASPer test, there'll be an option that'll allow you to kind of test your system settings to see if you actually have the capabilities to write the test given your device as such. And yeah, we'll move forward with that. So what we have here is, for example, Drexel University College of Medicine. We have all the test dates for which you can write the CASPer and schedule it and still have it distributed to that school in time. And you see their distribution deadline is December 20th, but there must be another school here whose deadline is a little bit shorter than that, and that's gonna hold us back a little bit. Now, what you also have to keep in mind is after you've completed the CASPer test, you have about a 2 to 3 week turnover time where it's processed and then it's sent out. So if you're looking to get your application verified quicker and you need the CASPer test for the school that you're applying for, try to plan to take it a little bit earlier. Typically, for American students, the CASPer test is often taken within June, July, August, kind of the summer months. And for Canadian students, um, it's often in the like just early kind of school months. So that is September and October and November even. But really, so long as you look at these test dates and understand the schools that you're applying for, you'll be fine with any sort of test date. Let me go back to my presentation. So how to study for the CASPer. So I talked about it in the beginning, but I can't stress it enough. Um, it you can study for the CASPer. It is kind of tough to do on your own because of that paywall that I told you about, and you'll notice that you'll find 1 or 2 or 3 free questions from certain websites, and unfortunately, the takealtus.com, the CASPer website that I showed you there, doesn't really have any kind of free resources for you to use to actually practice. And even so, they're very limited. And that's, once again, the inspiration kind of for PrepMatch to have some accessible website where we can go and practice and learn what it's like to take the CASPer test. So I'm here to tell you that you can study for the CASPer. So these are kind of our 4 major benefits that we based PrepMatch about. So we have a huge data bank of questions where you can go and practice these, practice being in the CASPer scenario under that time stress or without it, should you need that. We also have a peer-to-peer review system where you can submit your answers to be reviewed by another peer. Alongside that, you can review another peer's answers to see how they kind of answered a different scenario or a scenario that you've already done. And you can understand the different perspectives that people bring to the table and see kind of what people are able to come up with in those 5 minutes. Once again, everything is completely free. All you have to do is just sign up with an email address so that you can keep everything saved and in one place. And lastly, it helps you improve your typing speed. This is a bit of a not an underrated aspect, I would say, but definitely a super important tip or idea. The CASPer test very much stresses a good typing ability, and without that, you're unable to put your ideas forth, and you may be the greatest thinker in the world, but if you can't put that on the test and you can't express that through your typing ability, it really doesn't help you too much. So once again, kind of our formula here is you write a practice test using PrepMatch. After that, you submit it for grading and review. Mind it, you don't have to if you don't want to. And I'll go over how you can do that. But you can have that submitted and graded. You can also grade and review another peer's tests. They'll provide feedback on your test, and you just improve every time. And that's kind of how you cycle through it. Really helpful. So I'm going to go and demo what PrepMatch actually is and why it's so helpful. And I wish I had it when I was studying. So when you come to prepmatch.com, you'll be prompted to kind of sign up and make an account. After that, you'll have a screen like this where you have your dashboard. So we have a couple of things here: practice, answers, feedback, receive, etc. I'm just going to start with practice, which is the one you'll be using the most for sure. And here you'll see the vast customizability that you have with PrepMatch, and it's something that I absolutely love. So we have two different types of practice types that you can take. So we have the full circuit, which is simulating a full length CASPer test, much like the full lengths you have for the MCAT. This is an example of that, and I'll show you kind of what that looks like. But if we were to click random scenarios, what we could do is we could adjust the amount of scenarios that we go through. So that could be just one at a time, or we could do 3 or 4 in a row to maybe build up some stamina, or maybe we just don't have that much time that day. So the customizability there is really nice, and the flexibility is amazing. So if we choose a full circuit, you'll see we have a couple of pre-made circuits available, and these are rated based on feedback from users, whether they're easy or moderate or hard on the next page. So we can pick which one of these. I'm just going to pick circuit 1 for demonstration purposes. And here we can see the testing parameters that we can have. So would we like it to be timed? This is something that I think is super, super, super great. And when I was trying to prepare for my CASPer test, I had to use my own stopwatch on my phone. I would start the timer on my phone and I would type as furiously as I could. And meanwhile, I'd have to keep darting my eye to check, what time is it? How much time do I have left? And it really kind of takes away from the experience. Whereas on test day, you don't have that. Everything is through the program, and it just automatically advances you to the next scenario when you're out of time. There's no if, ands, or buts about it. So I think this is a super, super useful feature, and I would highly advise you all to practice with the timer on. Practicing with the timer off can be useful in the beginning to kind of build a foundation, and understanding, and just a general idea of what kind of questions you're going to encounter. And hopefully this seminar will do that for you. But the option is there should you so need it. Would we like it to be peer reviewed? I'm going to click yes, because why not? But I might change it afterwards. As you'll see, the answers I give are not going to be so thorough as you all should make them. Would I like test taking tips to be shown? I can click yes or no here. I'm going to go over what these test taking tips are after this demonstration, but I'll keep them on regardless. We won't really look at them. And just a little disclaimer here that these are questions, and they're not actual official CASPer prep questions, but these are the best that you're going to get. So when I click proceed here, we have the first scenario. So for each scenario, you're given 2 minutes to kind of digest it. So scenario 1, I'll give you all some time to read it. And I'll read it out loud myself. So during the peak of the COVID pandemic, hospital personnel were seen wearing their scrubs on the subways, outside while walking to and from hospitals, in grocery stores, etc. One day you were riding the subway when you saw an individual approaching a man with scrubs and tell him, "You shouldn't be wearing those outside the hospital, especially in these times." The man with scrubs replied, "Are you kidding me? I'm a frontline worker. Don't I deserve some respect and appreciation?" Now, in these 2 minutes, we clearly haven't used them all, and reading that aloud probably is a little bit slower than some of you read it. However, I would advise you to use every single second that you have on the CASPer test. What you'll come to realize in your practice is that 5 minutes is not a lot of time to write a well thought out answer to a question about a scenario that you've just been presented to. So really try to understand in this time what is going on, what kind of ideas you might be tested on, what kind of questions you might be asked, and try and think of maybe some scenarios in your own head, some experiences that you've had that could maybe relate to this or help support an answer of yours. I'll go over some more test taking tips as we go through some of the questions. I won't go through the whole circuit, of course, but I'll give you some pointers here and there. So what I'm first thinking when I read this is that potentially I'm going to be asked a little bit about my perspective on the situation. Do I think the frontline worker like can talk to the person on the subway like that? Do I think that the man on the subway has a point? Do I even pick a side? Something of the sort. There's going to be some sort of talk of conflict. So as you see, it automatically takes me right into it. And here we have the 3 different questions. I'll talk more about how to answer the questions in our next scenario. For this one, I'm just going to try and go over a baseline of what the style is, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how questions like this are graded. So spelling on the CASPer test doesn't actually matter. As long as the reader can make sense of your writing, right? And say you, instead of writing the, you write something like that, te. Um, the reader hopefully will understand that that's what you meant and will move by it. And they will not dock you points for any spelling errors. So that's okay. And it's really, really helpful because you're going to be typing quite furiously to understand these things. Now, as you'll see, we have these 3 different questions, and the typical style is these first 2 questions directly draw from the scenario that we just looked at. So as I suspected, question 1, who is in the wrong? So asking us, what do we think of the frontline workers' response, and what do we think of the men on the subway's response, right? And if we had enough time, we try and talk about both. You can be assertive and you can try and say, oh, the frontline worker is in the wrong because he acted very strongly and out of character, or the subway worker is wrong because he should show some respect to the um, frontline worker. Whatever your perspective is, you just put it out there, answer it. We look at question 2. Should hospitals implement a policy against wearing scrubs outside the hospital environment? Another kind of question drawing on the thing, but a little bit more abstract. And this is typically how things go. Question 1 is often a direct yes or no. What do you think of this? What would you do? Question 2 is usually building a little bit on that. And then question 3, as we'll see here, kind of is a bit of a bigger picture idea. Like, what are your thoughts on this? How would you relate to this idea? How would you relate to this experience? And we can see that here, question 3. The man in the scrubs talked about how frontline workers deserve appreciation. Do you think companies should be forced to provide healthcare workers with discounts and other benefits? Interesting question. So you can see this is kind of like a bigger idea, bigger picture stuff. In terms of what order you should answer the questions, it really doesn't matter. What you have to remember is there's one rater looking at this entire scenario. So say this is all I kind of get down for my question, or say I put in some gibberish over here, and I'm only able to answer questions 1 and 2, and I don't have enough time to get to question 3. Well, my rater will see that, I got to question 1, I got to question 2, but I was unable to get to question 3. Now, I advise you to try and answer every single question, because each question in its own right asks you to demonstrate something about one of the qualities that you're testing for, one of those images that I showed you earlier from the website itself, right? Compassion, professionalism, etc. So do your best to try and answer every single question, but don't fret if you don't answer every single question to the best of your ability, or if you answer a question and it's kind of running off a little bit, and at the end you are unable to finish that thought. It's okay. Understand that, say if I was your rater, I would read all of this and I'd have kind of an idea where you were at, and I would understand that maybe this person just ran out of time. Now, granted, to get the best score, it would follow that you want to try and answer every single question to the best of your ability, considering all perspectives and understanding the relationships, but that is much, much easier said than done. So let's move forward. We have scenario 2. Your friend Sammy comes to you with a serious secret to share. Before revealing it to you, he tells you that he can no longer keep it to himself. He makes you promise that you will keep silent. Then he informs you that he has committed a crime. 2 days later, while watching the news on TV, you learn that someone else has been arrested for Sammy's crime. So once again, I would try to kind of think here, what kind of questions could I be asked about this? Um, the most obvious one that I can see and that I can think of is, do we tell on Sammy, right? What I would tell you to really look at and understand is the relationship that you have to the different people in those scenarios. And sometimes it can be easy to get mixed up in the previous scenarios, especially as you get deeper and deeper into the exam. So in this one, Sammy is our friend, so we have some sort of history with Sammy. We know him, and that plays a part in whether we would rat him out, right? As opposed to if we saw Sammy as a bystander, we had no relationship to him, and we saw him commit a crime, how we would act would almost certainly be different than how we would act with a friend, someone that we knew, that we had some relationship with and that we could kind of talk to about things, right? What we also have to consider is that he told us he committed a crime, and we also learned that someone else has been arrested for the crime. So someone else has been wrongfully accused of this, and this is also likely something that we're going to have to deal with in our question. And how we choose to go about that and how we choose to understand that relationship is kind of completely up to us. And in a way, that's the double-edged sword that is CASPer. You're open to kind of express your opinions and your thoughts on how you would deal with a scenario like this. Um, and the hard part is not knowing and not having feedback on that. But what you can do is you can try your best to answer them to the best of your ability. Look at other people's feedback, see how they answered it, and adjust your answers as follows. So as we're looking here, question 1, what would you do? Great question. Likely, a good answer to a question like this or in a scenario like this is to just talk to Sammy, try to have him in a quiet place to meet up with him and to talk to him in a non-confrontational manner, and to tell him that what we know, and to ask him a little bit um, about why he why he did what he did, and um, maybe try to tell him like I think you should turn yourself in because this innocent person um, went to jail for a crime that you committed, etc., etc. You can take it any which way. Um, so that's probably what we would write for question 1. Question 2, imagine Sammy was your brother. How would this change your reaction to the situation? Remember, I told you to pay attention to that relationship earlier. In question 1, Sammy is our friend, right? In question 2, now Sammy is our brother, so he's family. This is a completely different relationship, and even though you can have friends that feel like family, this uh, question is specifically asking you how do you deal with different relationships, right? That's what they're asking you to try and show there. So how would this change your reaction to the situation? Now, you might go a little bit more out of your way, right? You might try and hire a lawyer or get another lawyer within the family. You may share this information with the rest of the family and say, hey, look, Sammy's in trouble. This is what he did. This is what I know. You can have a family talk. Whereas in question 1, you probably would have just had that discourse with family, with Sammy, and just him alone, right? You wouldn't have told your family so much about it. These are the kind of ideas that you're going to want to express, and these are the ideas that um, CASPer is looking for you to demonstrate. Question 3, in your opinion, is it ever acceptable to break a promise? So a little bit off key to what the situation is about, right? Nothing to do with the crime, nothing to do with anything. But that's what I was saying before. That third question, sometimes the most difficult question to answer because it's kind of out there. Uh, it it asks you to often kind of bring in your own experience into the question. And this really is the best place to kind of do that. So in our opinion, is it ever acceptable to break a promise? My advice would be to take a stance, either yes or no, be decisive with it. And if you say, yes, it's acceptable to break a promise, if you have a valid reason and you uh, explain to the person your method of thinking and how you're going to go about not trying to break that promise again. You could take the other route. You could say, no, it's not acceptable to break a promise because that's an understanding between two people. And breaking a promise is a breaking of trust and honesty between those two individuals. And it can really hurt the relationship moving forward. So I don't think it's acceptable to break a promise, right? And both of those answers are completely valid in their own right. It's more how you go about expressing those opinions. And this is where I would say an example could help out a bunch. So say you say yes, it's acceptable to make a promise. There was once a time where I had to babysit, and I promised this person I would babysit for them, but then something came up and a family member got sick or got into an accident, and I had to take care of that family member. So I had to break my responsibility and break this promise that I made to that person to babysit, right? So that could be your justification. There are extenuating circumstances that could cause people to break a promise, right? And that's why I believe it is acceptable to break a promise, although I don't believe that people should be breaking promises all the time. Otherwise, that would defeat the purpose of a promise. I'll take questions at the end. I see some people talking in the chat about it. I'll take some questions at the end. So scenario 3, you're working part-time in a sports equipment store. In the last month, some money from the register has started to go missing. Your boss accuses you of stealing the money. You are innocent. Wow, a tough one for sure. we're working part-time in a sports equipment store. In the last month, some money from the register has started to go missing. Your boss accused you of stealing. You are innocent. So we have a lot of information here that we're going to have to handle. We are an employee. We have a boss, and our relationship with that boss is now in jeopardy because our boss believes that we stole. We know that we're innocent. The most likely question that we're going to get is just flat out, what are we going to do? How do we deal with this? How do we work with our boss to prove our innocence? Right? How do we, in a professional manner and keeping our cool, how do we express our, say, anger or sadness or however we feel about this? How do we express this to our manager, and how do we work with them to find the culprit? Now, I would also wouldn't be surprised if they throw us a bit of a curveball and tell us that another employee of ours is the perpetrator. That would test our relationship handling ability, and it would be a great kind of way to add on to the question like this. So you could maybe expect something like that, but that's maybe going that next level. I'd also try and think maybe of a time where I was accused of something where I was actually innocent and how I dealt with that. That could be something interesting to bring up and to add, and it would shine. It would add some sort of shine to your answer and have that rater that's looking at your scenario remember you and maybe give you some extra points. Question 1: how do you manage the sudden change in your working relationship with your boss? Now, this question doesn't give too much room, I believe, for uh, many different answers, but once again, it's how you express yourself. So what I would say I would do is I would try to explain my position to the boss in a non-confrontational manner. I would try and set some time aside and find a quiet location alone and talk to the boss about um, how I'm feeling, why I believe I'm innocent. I would like to understand why the boss believes that I'm guilty, and I would try to come up with a plan to prove my innocence to find whoever stole the money. Right? I don't want this relationship to be ruined over a misunderstanding that could have happened. Question 2: your boss decides to decrease your payment to compensate for what he thinks you stole. How would you manage this situation? So at this point in time, what's happened is the the situation has escalated, right? The boss believes that we're guilty and has acted upon it. So how do we deal with uh, this scenario? There's a couple of things you could do. You could take a more direct approach, and you could try and go to the boss's boss to figure things out, and that would be a valid strategy. You could try to say to your boss that, hey, like, I understand why you think I did this. I understand why you're trying to deduct my payments to compensate for the things that you think I stole. Please let me work with you so that I can show you that I'm innocent, and so that I can work to regain your trust. And hopefully, once you understand my innocence and understand that I didn't do it, we can rectify the situation. You can uh, give me back what I worked for. Let's see how much time we have here. 3 minutes left. So suppose you know that it was a coworker of yours that stole the money. See, I called it. Almost like I knew this would happen. The friend is in a difficult situation, difficult financial situation, and while you don't condone what they did, you understand why they did it. How does this information change what you would do? A toughie. Question 3, in my opinion, always one of the hardest ones to answer, and really shows your true colors. And it's often it's often the question you have the least time to answer, because most people go 1, 2, and 3. It just makes the most sense. It's what I do as well. But very interesting question. So now that we know that our friend is in it, and we know who the perpetrator is, our our stance and our approach will change. We would likely try to have a discourse with the manager as well as our friend to express our frustration with our friend and tell them, hey, look, the boss thinks that I'm guilty. I understand why you did it. We can't have other coworkers stealing money from the register, and um, I would try to work with them to understand how they got in this financial situation. I would try to, once again, approach them in a non-confrontational manner, talk to them through it, why they actually felt so desperate that they wanted to steal from the store. And I would try my best to arrange a way where my friend either gives back the money or picks up some extra shifts, or I would try and find a way to see how comfortable my friend would be to talk to the manager and to maybe admit their mistakes and to find a way to rectify and prevent this from happening in the future, right? Maybe giving them extra shifts, maybe giving them a pay raise, maybe doing giving them some more paid leave time for whatever they need to do. A bunch of different ways you can go about answering it, and that's in a way the beauty of it, and that's why I enjoy these CASPer scenarios. But sometimes it makes it a little bit difficult to say, oh, this is the correct answer, this is the right way to do things. But this is where practice comes and helps. Scenario 4. Albert Einstein once said, curiosity has its own reason for existing. That's it. These are the hardest kinds of scenarios to answer, in my opinion, because they don't give you a lot to go off of. You know who Albert Einstein is, and we see this quote, curiosity has its own reason for existing. We're definitely going to be asked, what's our opinion on this? Do we agree, disagree? What do we think of curiosity? Something of the sort. But it's hard to plan in advance. That's why I think these ones are quite tough. But the more you go through them and the more you encounter these kinds of just quote scenarios, the better you'll be at really staying fresh and answering the questions in a succinct manner and having your thoughts well organized and well structured in a short period of time. So let's jump into it. Normally I would take the full time, but not much more we can do here. What did Albert Einstein mean when he said that? Curiosity has its own reason for existing. I'm going to leave it open to y'all to kind of figure out what this is about. I would try to draw on some experiences that I had where maybe I demonstrated curiosity. As you can see, that's question 3. And I could potentially just limit my own experiences to that question. But it can also be an effective strategy to try and use your own experience and have a theme for your answer, right? Because the rater will see every single question for this scenario. And having that running theme may add a little bit more to it. And that could be a way I would describe how or what I think Einstein meant when he said that. When can curiosity be dangerous? Once again, almost asking us, begging us to give them a scenario or an example when we were in a situation where we say we're in a lab of sorts doing some chemistry, or we were volunteering somewhere and we saw something happen, we saw a spill, something of the sorts. We can really use our own experiences to draw upon and answer them. And I'll go into, as I finish with this, I don't think we'll do many more. If anything, this will be the last question or last scenario I do. But I would advise all of you, as you go through these scenarios, as you realize that having these experiences handy and ready to talk about, it can be super, super useful to have a repertoire of short and succinct ways of describing different experiences that can demonstrate different qualities that the CASPer test is looking for. In my own experience, in my own uh, life, I've worked as a club executive, as a club president at my university. And in that, I had to deal with a bunch of interpersonal conflict. I had to lead teams. I had to book uh, different places, different residences with different companies. So what I do and what I've done is have this big scenario, this big position that I've done, and have these ideas and these experiences that I've had, and I'll adjust them accordingly to answer these questions to the best of my ability. And because I've known them and they're so intimately grained in my mind, I can draw on them very quickly, and I can describe them quickly, and most importantly, I can answer the question well with that. With that, I'm just going to click off of this. I'm going to exit the circuit, and I'll show you a little bit more about what goes on and why PrepMatch is not just practice. So we can see our answers here. I'll look at all my answers, and we can see my scrubs outside the hospital here. And we have a couple of tags here that tell us some stuff about our answering. So what we first know is that we clicked for this answer to be reviewed. Say I don't want this answer to be reviewed for whatever reason, I feel a little uncomfortable with it, I'm gonna unclick this. I'm gonna say I don't want this for peer review because Frankly, this is not anything that anyone can review, but it is useful when you actually try and actually do it on your own to have this review and have that feedback. This tells me the time that I was typing for, and this tells me the words per minute, so how fast I was. And having these two stats can show you a little bit and give you some sort of point of reference for if you're improving, if you're typing a little bit faster, if you're getting your ideas down quicker. And this is a great way of measuring progress. And when I was talking about my own CASPer prep and how I would use my stopwatch and how I would type on Microsoft Word trying to answer the few questions that were available, I had no way of knowing how well I was doing. I could just compare my answers and say, oh, wow, like I didn't write a lot for this answer or this scenario. Maybe I'm just not great at that. I had no tangible way to really see this information. And this is so convenient. And I love that. Now, what we can also do is we can see some feedback that we receive for certain answers here, and we can see some of the feedback. This is a question I had, and people feel like I did a good job on this one, so they don't have very many criticisms. But as you move forward and as you answer more and more questions, you'll see more and more feedback. And here we can review another peer's answer, much like I showed you. It's a similar screen where we would give people a rating out of 5. We would say what we think they did well and what we think they didn't do well. So I'll show you that. So we have an overwhelmed vet student here. And if I wanted to give them feedback, I would type a little bit about this. I would type a little bit about that, give them a rating, etc. Why would I want to give feedback though? Say I just want to practice. Well, the more you give feedback, the more you'll have your own answers reviewed and given feedback, and that process kind of continues. And as you read more and more people's answers, and as you give more and more feedback, you'll get better at it, you'll get quicker at it, and you'll see some common themes, some common patterns. You'll learn a little bit, and that's kind of the beauty of the cycle and the circle that PrepMatch creates here. Now, that's about everything I wanted to show you on PrepMatch. I'm going to go back to my presentation. And I'm going to share with you those test taking tips. This is what it ultimately boils down to. Speed, speed, speed. You may have the greatest ideas, but if you can't type them out in time, they are useless. Try to develop a general structure to your answer to reduce the time it takes for you to think and to type things out. Like I said, spelling and grammar don't count, so don't worry about them too much. Just try to put your ideas on the page. Kind of in theme with that, be firm with your decisions. If you decide to take one route with your decisions, you rarely have time to delete your answers and change them completely. It's better to have a partially complete answer than no answer at all. Brainstorm key events in your life. This is what I was talking about that leadership position, about that club executive position. Lots of CASPer questions will ask you to reflect back on different events in your life, and it makes a world of a difference to think of these scenarios ahead of time and have many of them at the back of your mind before taking the test. I can't stress that one enough. And very quickly into your CASPer prep, you'll realize that this is one of the most important things that you can do. Lastly, be a good person. No matter what your values are, you have to be considerate when criticizing the actions of individuals in a scenario. Put yourselves in their shoes and be as empathetic as you can be. I tried to highlight this when I said that Sammy is our friend in that relationship, in that scenario, because it's easy to just think of Sammy as any other person, right? We don't know who he is or who she is. And what I would advise you to do is to try and think of someone else who is your friend, right? And put them and picture them as Sammy. And how would you deal with that scenario in that light? Doing that can kind of help you guide your answer towards what these raters are kind of looking for, and it'll help you demonstrate those core competencies. In terms of structuring your answer, that's what I said. Speed is super important, and having a structure can be helpful. These are the main things that you want to consider in your answer, and often you won't have enough time to answer these questions for more than one sentence for each question. So the first thing you want to answer, obviously, what's the main issue here? Answer the question. So do you tell on Sammy? Yes or no? Answer the question and address it. Like the issue here is that my friend Sammy committed a crime, and I know that someone else was charged for it and they're innocent, and I want to have a discourse with him because this is a wrong action or this is a wrongdoing to someone. Who is involved in the scenario? How did the relationships between them play a part? So you always want to address the people involved and how those relationships play a role in that scenario. So like I said, the difference between the friend versus the brother, right? Sammy's relationship to us changes, and that plays a part in how we would answer and how we would go about things. What are the options and which one will you go with? This is something you have to answer in your head, and you have to put down the answer that you'll go with. If you have time, you can list the different options that you can go with and describe one and pick one. And this is purely up to your own kind of typing speed and see if you can get this down, but definitely consider all the options and pick one and run with it. And lastly, why did you go with the option that you chose? Give yourself one sentence or two sentences to support your answer and say, I chose this because of this, right? I did this because Sammy is my brother and this is how I think family should be treated, etc. Be firm with your decisions, have clear answers, and practice, practice, practice. 5 minutes may seem like a long time for presenting, for writing a speech, for talking, but when it comes to typing, when it comes to answering these difficult questions on scenarios that you haven't seen before, it really, really flies by. And the best thing you can do is just to practice. And PrepMatch is the perfect thing you can do for that. Now, despite our limited history, we've had a lot of great feedback with thousands of users coming to the site and really, really saying that they enjoyed how we do things and that the website exists, frankly. After this, I'm going to open it up to the Q&A. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Med School Tutors for hosting this seminar. And yeah, I open the floor to everyone.
It looks like we had gotten some fun questions while you were talking, Sebastian. There was one from Yurin about, is there a recommended length for writing answers?
So in terms of length, I think that it really doesn't matter so much as how well the ideas are structured and how well you convey those competencies. Once again, when you try practicing, you'll see that there is a very limited length that you'll be able to produce. And say you spend all your time answering one question, and you can do that to test for yourself. Divide that answer in three, and that's how much length you got. Once again, I don't think it matters how long it is. I think it matters the content and really how well you describe things. And that's where practice comes in, right? Taking out those extra filler words. So I
Yeah.
don't have a recommended length. But
Practice makes progress, right? The
yeah,
more repetition you do, the more quickly you'll see, I think, what actually works for the time limit, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There was another great question earlier. I'm not sure you sort of answered it, but Ramia asked, how do we know in what circumstances it would be okay to take a stance or pick a side on a question rather than stay neutral? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's part of the beauty of the CASPer. I think being able to have a scenario where you can take a stance or you cannot and you can remain impartial. I find that it's easier to take a stance and to pick something and talk about why, but it is important to consider the other side. And as future physicians or future doctors or any medical professional, it's important always to consider both sides. So it can be helpful whether or not you take a stance to try and consider all perspective and say like that I thought about this other side, but here's the reason that I went with this one. That can be another way to show evidence for a certain stance that you chose.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And I think there's a few questions that have come in, and this might be a good one to wrap up on, but a few people have asked kind of around, should they be worried about sharing anything that's too personal on this test when they're answering things?
Mhm. I think it's okay. I would imagine that as you once again as you practice, you'll realize that you won't have that much time to actually be as personal as you may like. Um, I would avoid uh, giving any real names, and I would use pseudonyms just for the people's privacy. I don't think that those raters are going to do anything with that, and I don't think that they will give you extra marks because it's extra personal. I think it's more the idea that you are connecting it to an experience that you've had, and that experience should be described pretty clearly and pretty, and like I said, in a succinct manner. So yeah, that's my answer.
That makes sense. I actually am not sure if you saw the question that just came in, but is that something you can speak to?
I don't recall when I wrote the CASPer test. This is where I would advise you to check the website. I would, once again, fact check me, do what you will. Whatever I say is what I say, and this is what I've, to the best of my knowledge. But go to the website and double check. When I wrote it both times, I don't believe I was allowed to use a piece of paper or take notes because I could have had some external resources. I could have had other stuff written on it. And that's another reason when they ask you to prepare and do a CASPer test kind of practice where they just test your systems. It's why they want the webcam, why they want the microphone, because they don't want anyone or any external resources to guide you or assist you. So I don't think you're allowed, but I think that will be probably under the frequently asked questions in
Yeah, that's a good point.
online.
It's like just check local testing centers, right? Check with what the
Yeah,
different protocols are, because I think so much has been in flux in the past year and a half, 2 years. So
yeah,
very good.
yeah. And I don't want you to practice, having a piece of paper and doing all that, and then test day comes and they tell you, oh, sorry, you can't do that. So
Yeah. Yeah. This is
definitely
one of
check
those controllables that if you research in advance, it'll help you lower your stress come
for
test,
sure,
you know?
for
Very
sure.
This is excellent. Thank you all so much for the questions you've been sending through and for participating. It always makes doing webinars so much fun. I know I got to just listen this time a lot, which was really nice. So Sebastian, thank you for taking us through everything and sharing your perspective with us. It was really a pleasure working with you on this. And everybody, you can see on the screen how to get in touch with us. If you're interested in PrepMatch, you can go to their website at prepmatch.com. You can email them at support@prepmatch.com. You want to learn more about what we do at Med School Tutors with the one-on-one tutoring, you can see us at medschooltutors.com or email us at hq@medschooltutors.com. And yeah, this has just been a pleasure and sincerely wishing you all the best. And we're here if you need us. And Sebastian, any parting words?
You kind of covered it all, Faith. Thank you so much. I'm so happy that we got the opportunity to share all this information, to have this session. It really was a blast and some great questions there. I hope you all do your best and practice for CASPer and do your best. And I wish everyone the best. Thank you so much
Well,
and have a
thanks,
good night.
everybody. Have a great night.